Thank you, and good evening, everyone. A really, really warm welcome to tonight's lecture here in the Stephen A. Schwarzman Auditorium, our brand new auditorium as part of our renewed Frick collection. My name is Axel Ruger. I'm the Anna Maria and Stephen Callan director of the Frick collection, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome you tonight to share with you really some of the inside stories and some of the secrets around really the redevelopment and this amazing refurbishment of the Frick collection here. I would like to ask you to put your phones on silence, because as luck would have it, that one spam call that you get once a week will come in tonight during the lecture. So we are really thrilled to host Annabelle Selldorf here this evening, the principal and head designer of Selldorf Architects. Of course, you will have all known and heard about Annabelle, of course, over the last weeks and months, and there's not a moment has gone by where the Frick has not been in the press, has not been mentioned and talked about, and literally every square inch, it seems like, of this building has also been described and an article has been devoted to it. So you probably already know the building better than many of us almost do. In this lecture series, which is entitled Mansion to Museum, we really look at in a number of lectures at the development of the Frick. And this goes hand in hand also with a publication that is coming out that is co-authored by Annabelle herself and my predecessor, Ian Wardroper, who was, of course, the director who led this whole project, whose vision, energy and tenacity, really, and imagination has really led us to be in the Frick as we are now. The two of them together have co-authored this publication with also contributions by Barry Bergdahl and Richard Southwick and photographs by Hélène Binet, who is one of the foremost architectural photographers, and that publication will come out later this summer. And so as part of that, the lecture series introduces aspects of this project. Annabelle, just to introduce her briefly, she and I, we go way back. We've been friends for a long time, fellow Germans, mind you, Annabelle being from Cologne. I myself come from a town less well known, not far away. And actually, the little anecdote is, last year, after I had been appointed, but it was not public knowledge yet, I ran into Annabelle at an exhibition opening in London, where I was living, and we had the usual, oh, hey, nice to see you, you know, good friends, know each other for a long time. And I thought, you don't know yet that we're going to have a very different conversation very soon. So that has, of course, now worked out really well. So Annabelle, from Cologne, but received her bachelor degree in architecture from the Pratt Institute and the Master of Architecture from Syracuse University. She is, of course, much appreciated, therefore, fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and she serves on the board of the Architectural League of New York, the World Monuments Fund, and the Center of Curatorial Studies at Bard College. And she has also taught at Harvard Graduate School of Design and Syracuse University. And she is also, to add to those accolades, member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and was recipient of their award in architecture in 2014, and in 2016 received the AIA New York Medal of Honor. And her practice has been established here in New York City in 1988. Incidentally, the very first time I came to New York was in that very year. I still remember also coming to the Frick at that very moment for the first time. And with Annabelle, of course, one of her sort of, if you like, trademarks really has become to really respond as an architect in the most creative way to really complex requirements also of existing structures, often of important buildings, historic ensembles, and to help develop them further and to help develop them on their road. And some of the projects that she has been engaged in speak to that. So she has been, of course, as part of her project, worked on the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, the Clark Art Institute, the Neue Gallery, of course, here in New York City, just around the corner. as well as also commissions, most recently, besides us, in parallel, really, the National Gallery in London, where she sort of also helped redevelop the Sainsbury wing, which opened only a few weeks after we opened here, and then the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, and working now also on an expansion of the Art Gallery of Ontario, and most recently, hot off the press, as it were, has been awarded also a project to help redevelop, as it were, the Wallace Collection in London, a sort of sister institution really to us, also having being a formerly private house and collection, now a public museum. So all of that, very, very complex projects, as it were, where you have to go in with a great understanding, and I think that's really the key quality that speaks to me so much, is that really deep understanding and respect for the existing structure for the work that has been done by colleagues in the past, as it were, and deal with those sort of responsibly, and yet also adding to that a sort of modern language that then is in dialogue with those historical structures. And that is, of course, very much what has happened here at the Frick Collection. So with that, I hope you will enjoy the evening, and please welcome Annabelle Selldorf. Thank you very much.
What did he say? It's very nice to be here, and it's really quite strange to be in a full house. The sound is really rather loud. Can you turn it down a little? I am thrilled to be here, thrilled to see all of you. I'm extremely happy about this auditorium. And I won't bore you about the making of it for too long, but just a little bit. But before I get started, I want to say that in order to make a project such as this one, it doesn't just take a village, it takes an entire town of people who are committed, interested, dedicated, smart, experienced, willing, patient, passionate, and it was 7 years of my life in which I've encountered so many of them. So I want to just quickly read a list of names, and it's far from complete. So anybody who I don't mention who happens to be here or knows somebody, don't tell them I didn't mention their name. Because it's really meant to be entirely inclusive. I'm quite sad, actually, because this part of my life is now over, and I have to rely on friendship and loyalty that we have found in this time to continue with the team. But so let me just say, to begin with gratitude to the board of trustees at the Frick, who were incredibly welcoming. During the interview process, I was told, they're really tough. They don't like women. Seriously, somebody said that. Who doesn't like women? They're very conservative. Well, maybe, but not so much. Be that as it may, it was Ian Wardropper who I think was the decisive voice in appointing us Selldorf Architects, and together with Carolyn Straub and Joe Shatoff, they really led the project, as it were, working with the curatorial team. I'm seeing Amy and G here, and it was really a lot of fun to get to know the art, the museum, all of that. We couldn't have done anything without Beyer Blinder Bell, our partners in crime as executive architects, headed up by Richard Southwick, with Susan Bobb, Joe Gall, and of course Peter Scaglione. These guys were by our side every step along the way. For the garden, which mattered so much to New Yorkers, we won Lyndon Miller, the famous garden designer, to come in and make the Tableau Garden on 70th Street better than it ever was before. It's hard to imagine that there are people complaining about this garden not being 100% down to the last leaf what it was at one time. I, on the other hand, have completely trusted Lyndon with bringing to us an understanding of what Russell Page's original intent was for the garden. And this is the first year, this is the first season. We have the pond back, the ducks back, and it's really a wonderful thing. So thank you to Lyndon. Of course, I want to thank Joe Mizzi and Paul Hayden and everybody at Siami Construction for leading us through a very long time of a very, very complex project. They've always made sure that quality of construction is ahead of everything else. They endured my impatience on so many moments, but steadily helped us through the process. I don't want to be remiss in thanking the Arab team, Raj Patel, Ed Arrhenius, Marcus Schulte, Tali Mayakovsky, and Kateri Knapp for their able support with the auditorium, with the exterior envelope, and many other details in the building. Of course, our MEP engineers bore the brunt of it because we have an entire new MEP system. So thanks to Kohler Ronan, Bob Hedman, ahead of everyone. And then, of course, the structural engineers, Guy Nordenson, and in tandem with SGH, Kevin Polin was the lead structural engineer. Hervé Descott and Jenny Evenson were from L'Observatoire, our fantastic lighting designers. We've really enjoyed working together on many projects, but in this particular project, they, of course, brought in fantastic expertise, understanding art and architecture all at the same time. And our day lighting specialists, which hopefully you all have enjoyed, the wonderful improved quality of light in the big hall, in the West Gallery, in the East Gallery, and in the Oval Gallery, but also in the Garden Court. So, like I said, it's an incomplete list, but you'd be here all night if I didn't stop now. And without further ado, here we are seeing slide number 1, the looking through the gate, looking at the addition behind the garden wall at 70th Street. Very briefly, I want to tell you about who we are as an office. We are Selldorf Architects, reside at Union Square. We're an office of approximately 60 plus people. And we have a really wonderful space in which a very smart, wonderful group of dedicated people work together, collaborate, and yeah, it's perhaps the thing that I'm most proud of, is to have a team that is so intent to really bring projects home. Pivoting right to the Frick Mansion, the title says From Mansion to Museum. That's not really what I am focusing on, because I'm really just going to talk about the museum. When you see the book, Ian Wardropper has written extensively about that transition from the mansion. But here's a picture of 1914, when it really was a house. And it takes a moment to appreciate that, in fact, Henry Clay Frick decided to buy a lot on 70th Street, between 70th and 71st Street on Fifth Avenue, where there was a library. It's the famous Lenox Library that it's hard to believe was actually taken down and its contents transferred to the New York Public Library. Henry Clay Frick commissioned Thomas Hastings of the famous firm Carrere and Hastings with the job to build his home, a stately home at that, and they decided right away not only to take this amazing piece of architecture down, but they also decided to afford a big garden right in front of the house, even though they were looking out on Central Park. Even in 1914, that was an unusual move, and a move that proves a certain amount of not just confidence, but a sort of understanding of where the city starts and private life ends. And of course, in 1914, the 3 wonderful magnolia trees were not there yet. Fast forward to now 1935, after his death, or rather after the death of his wife Adelaide, he had bequeathed that the house would become a museum, and without much hesitation, the new Frick Board of Trustees, headed up by Helen, the daughter, hired John Russell Pope to convert the house into a museum. Here you are looking at one of my favorite facade on 71st Street that had always had a very long, solid wall where the West Gallery was, which is part of the original house. But when John Russell Pope added the Oval Gallery and the East Gallery, he simply extended the wall. And it's a completely amazing, to me, heroic move to just have this long, solid wall with an exclamation point of a new library that he was commissioned to provide as well. So this is the very moment where John Russell Pope actually expresses his personality, when elsewhere he's really sort of in service of Thomas Hastings. And that's an interesting thing, right? They were 2 contemporary architects who practiced at the same time with very famous buildings in their portfolio. John Russell Pope, did, among other, the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and Carrere and Hastings did the New York Public Library and many other things. So to understand what the difference in their work is, you have to look a little bit carefully. And when we began the project, there was some article in which the writer said that I, Annabelle Selldorf, that I am no John Russell Pope, and I am happy to confirm I'm not. However, that statement is not entirely a joke, because it talks about how do you encounter a building that is so revered by the public. So many people love the Frick for what it delivers to the public. I love it, just the same. So thinking about how do you contribute architecture, a new bit of building onto an existing one, how do you do that? It's 80 years later, and and what does that look like? Well, among other, it looks like this auditorium. But our first interest and orientation, of course, was to think about the existing museum. We knew that nobody wanted change. Everybody wanted to make sure that this beloved museum would continue to exhibit art, to continue to welcome people in much the same way that they had always experienced it. And here, of course, is that famous room with the living room that today, I think everybody would agree, looks exactly like it did before. Lighting is a little bit better. Carpets are a little bit cleaner. The wood paneling is polished, but everything is in its place and things are as they should be. Similar to the West Gallery, where hopefully you can tell the difference. We put in a new skylight over the entire length of the 3 galleries, and they completely changed the atmosphere in this room. There's a new carpet. There are beautifully Lyon woven tapestries on the wall that are absolutely gorgeous and have the same colors as they were originally, and most of the paintings are in the place where you remember them. But I think what is very different, it is that now you can enjoy the daylight in a completely different way, and we're very, very proud of this complicated work that many of the people whose name I mentioned earlier contributed to providing. And of course, the garden court with the much improved or cleaned rather limestone and the new skylights, the new lighting, all of these things in some ways contribute to not changing very much. But perhaps one of the things that is most important is the fact that now we invite people to come to the second floor. Almost everybody who used to come to the Frick would think, what am I missing up there on the second floor? Well, you missed some pretty messy offices. Indeed, ever since the house was no longer a house but a museum, the second floor was mostly used for staff as working quarters. And while the director had a nice place where he invited potential donors to lunch, everybody else was in pretty tight quarters. But these rooms were wonderful, and of course they are very similar similar. They were what they were, built originally. But while we think of the Frick as the original mansion of the family, it is not a house museum. So it was entirely wonderful to explore the possibilities of converting the rooms on the second floor for exhibition of the much expanded collection. And somebody else will talk about that at length and with eloquence. But suffice it to say that all of the things that we needed to have accomplished, air conditioning, lighting, finishes, etc., they were all done by the same team and with the same dedication. Now, just a small word about the exterior. Here is a view of people looking into what Russell Page referred to as the tableau garden. People aren't, or the public isn't allowed in the garden, but you could always see it from the street, and people cared about it very much. What most people didn't realize is that the garden was always a roof garden. In its place had at one time stood 2 or 3 townhouses, really 2 townhouses, and a third one where the reception hall is. And underneath was indeed a basement, and the basement that you find yourself in now. It had been excavated very deeply in the 1940s in order to create an art vault. And that removing that vault was a major undertaking. Anybody who walked by this construction site during the early days would have known that it was very noisy and indeed a little bit of an imposition for the poor neighbors. So we are grateful that they stuck with us to now celebrate the beautiful result. the focus for the renovation was on art, education, visitor experience, and infrastructure. Not necessarily in that order, but big picture, these were the topics that needed to be addressed. So just to make things a little bit more clear, I think it's worth looking for a minute at the morphology of the building. 1914 was the finish of the original mansion by Carrere and Hastings. Thomas Hastings in particular was the partner in charge. Then in 1924, a small library building was added to the north on 71st Street. Then in 1935, what followed was the conversion to a museum through John Russell Pope. And you can see that in 1941, that little pink thing, I don't know, can you see it here? Yep. This is where the vault was added. And then later in 1977, the reception hall was built and the Russell Page Garden was added. You can see the same thing here in plan. To me, what matters the most was to understand that with these various interventions that we will explain some more, it was necessary to understand how people would now circulate in the building. When you used to only roam around the ground floor, as it were, you now needed to find a way to the second floor. While there were elevators in the building, they were so small and so old that they wouldn't accommodate people in a wheelchair. So what we did is we expanded the reception hall that undoubtedly you came in through, and added 2 elevators and a new staircase there that would bring people both up to the second floor and concurrent with the floor level in the mansion, but would also bring you down 1 level to coat rooms and bathrooms and a further level down here to the auditorium. And this was kind of a strategic moment, is to understand that how people can circulate in the museum. You may have heard people speaking about the necessity of being able to walk in a loop, to begin at one end and not have to backtrack to come all the way back to the other end. In my mind, it's important that every visitor feel welcome and feel invited to choose their own path. But once you're on that path, that it feels all relatively logical. And I think we have achieved that here, and it certainly a lot of thinking and effort has gone into how to connect special exhibitions with the permanent galleries, how to connect people to the vertical access of the auditorium, etc. And there really is a lot to think about. But when it comes to the addition, which you see here, separate from the mansion, we had only a very shallow amount of real estate available to which we could add to the rear of the library, which you see here on the right-hand side, because that had always been the back of a building that was never seen on the street. And then as we modified what used to be called the round lecture room, we added on top of that former lecture room and were able to bring additional square footage to that area. Why was that important? Because we wanted to make room on the second floor, as I said, for new exhibition space, and people had to be housed somewhere. I can confirm that their working conditions were abominable, and so we rectified this while we were at it. And this is what that looks like. I show you this image, which you've seen in the beginning again, because I am quite proud of how the volumetric development of this architecture comes about. What we did is we added literally to the rear of the library in the rectangle that you see here, and then put a sister volume over that old music room and connected them by a bridge. We didn't have to do that. We could have just made one large facade. But of course, there's every intuition tells you that you want proportionally relate to the existing building, not make this addition so massive that you couldn't relate it to the fabric of the existing building. But not just the existing building, also really the neighborhood of the Upper East Side that has plenty of townhouses with these kinds of proportions. Michael Kimmelman called the exterior asinine. Anodyne, not asinine. Anyway, I looked it up, and it's not so bad. It just says it's very low-key, and that really was the idea. Now, first I read this, and I thought, it's like, oh my God, that's terrible. But then I realized, no, it's not so bad. It's actually exactly what we wanted. We wanted a very simple, very elegantly proportioned facade that had, a relationship with the facades of the library, the existing buildings. We used the same kind of Indiana limestone. However, the construction elements that you see here are very, very different in the sense that they are highly insulated facades and have all kinds of bells and whistles that keep the people warm in the winter. And here is what that looks like. To me, it was a great deal of worry that in contemporary construction you have to have expansion joints and all kinds of sort of relief systems for the facade. And I was worried that that would stand out against the old facade. In fact, it just is a very simple device to reproportion the facade again, and I'm quite happy with it. The other thing that is rather important to talk about is the fact that with a commitment to making the building fully accessible, we were able to introduce a ramp that you see the opening to on the right-hand side of the main entrance to ensure that people can come in a wheelchair via a ramp and enter the building through the same doors. This necessitated to change these stairs a little bit, but today one doesn't even think about it because they look the same in every other respect. And then once inside the reception hall, or the entrance hall rather, you will again think that nothing much has changed, but perhaps you can see something that you weren't able to see before. What that is, it's a polished wood ceiling that is really of very lovely quality and is lit completely differently. And now it's a friendly, welcoming space. It's such a simple thing, isn't it? To think, if you turn on the lights, everybody can see, and it makes most people feel better. But it's not only that. I think what is really significantly different is that by removing the bookstore and a circular stair that was part of the reception hall to the east of this room, we were now able to bring in daylight that comes flooding in. And I think that psychologically helps everyone to understand where they are and where they can go. I'm not going to trouble you for too long with the plan here. But we felt that it was really quite important to understand, again, that this tableau garden is now very much central to the experience of the building from all of the floors. There's a cafe on the second floor that you'll see in a moment, and it looks down on the garden. You see the garden much more readily when you are in the reception hall, but also in the new education department that we never had before, that is part of the addition to the building. And here, where my cursor is going around, is where the new temporary exhibition spaces are connecting to the north to the series of galleries in the mansion. Again, what is very interesting is that we were able to change the proportion of the reception hall by Bailey, Van Dyck, and Polar that had only been built in 1977 to make it into something that is wider and also a little bit lower. In other words, the footprint is the same, but the use of the space is quite different. How is it different? We added the aforementioned elevators right here and a second staircase that takes people all the way up to the second floor, but also down to the lower levels. And the change in finish between yellow and stone seems to evoke a really very different atmosphere, one that I think both in every respect is more welcoming for visitors. Another thing that I am a little bit proud of is the fact that we were able to have these lanterns produced because it was very clear that this room had a particular proportion, that there was a kind of structure that is established as a result of these windows. So we have these kind of coffered ceilings, and we were looking to have a kind of lantern lighting the room, lending the space some sort of festive feeling. And for the longest time, I think Ian Wardropper and everybody on the team is like, no, there she comes again, another lighting proposal. Ultimately, we designed these lanterns with a producer in Murano, in Italy. Pier Paolo Seguso is his name. These lanterns are loosely based on the lanterns that exist in the winter garden, or garden court rather. So to me, it's very nice to see that there is a kind of transformation of how light is communicated, etc. And here is another picture and another picture, but you've perhaps already seen them hanging in the reception hall. What's also noteworthy is the cantilevered stair that goes through 4 floors, or 5 floors really, up to the second floor and down to coat room, bathroom, and auditorium, and lower level auditorium. There was only really one place where that stair could go, similar to the placement of the elevators that could only be in that one place. And it was really quite complicated to meet all of the heights. Paul Granger in the office is the stairman, and I think that he nearly lost his mind trying to get it all calibrated. But it's difficult to put a staircase such as this one in a building that is, on one hand, vaguely modern, if you will, but that wanted to reference the grand staircase in the mansion. And I'm always amused to hear people saying, I think this looks like Art Deco, or I don't know, everybody thinks something else. But what I love is the fact that the quality of the stone is so extraordinary that it lends a kind of painterly quality to to this three-dimensional object that, in addition, is very agreeable to walk up and down on. And here you see it in construction. It is really remarkable that we were able to get this done, and it was not easy. Many people lost a lot of sleep over placing this object in the space. And yeah, when it was all under construction, I have to say it was a humbling experience to realize how you can think about something in your head. You can then put it down on paper. You can detail it. You can say, this is how it's all put together. But then experiencing the process of construction and the grand task of sequencing the work to be done, where at one point the reception hall was perilously hanging in midair. It wasn't actually funny. It was like, I don't know why you laugh, but it was awe-inspiring. And there were many, many moments that were awe-inspiring. I'd like to direct your attention to this area right here. It looks like sauerkraut or something, but this is actually the steel that was removed from the vault. And that was tremendous, the effort and the timing of it. It was really an incredible experience, and I'm always marvel at looking at these pictures, so sorry if I'm going on too long. But then, of course, also putting a second floor on top of the reception hall, making sure that the proportion of that upper lobby is such that you actually don't see the second floor very much on from the street, was another exercise in how do we do this, coordinating it with landmarks and every other agency in New York that allowed us to make these modifications and additions to the building. And here you see a picture of how there was a second roof added, or a temporary roof added, over the gallery spaces when the new skylights were put in. You have to imagine every article mentions what the cost of this renovation was. It wasn't frivolous, really. It's an enormous amount of money, but an enormous amount of changes that have been made that make this building energy efficient, that makes the art safe and the space comfortable for everybody. And here's the education department that I mentioned earlier. It is literally a beautiful, simple room to the north of the garden, and allows students, when they're taking art classes or listening to seminars, to watch the little ducks in the pond. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they come every year and they're wonderful. And the special exhibition space, as yet empty. No, it's not empty anymore. The first exhibition is coming very shortly, and we're really excited for everybody to see the space. It is, like I said, where the former music or lecture room was. That room was circular. So when we brought the auditorium down to the lower level, we all of a sudden found ourselves with a square space. And this allowed us to make 3 different sized exhibition spaces that can be used flexibly, and in terms of detail are similar, if not the same, as the gallery spaces where the permanent collection hangs. And these are literally just images showing you how there's vistas through, and the connection is palpable. A view of the second floor on the in the reception hall. Again, for us it was important to make sure that it feels continuous, that visitors find the mansion with ease. There's a small shop. I've seen recently people are standing in line, and that's marvelous, of course. But this is also a place where one can rest after having visited the upper floor and maybe waiting to. Here's a picture of the shop, and eventually, as soon as next Friday, I understand, the cafe will open to the public. And of course, it's very nice to have a cafe when the Frick never did have a cafe before. It's really not only do you spend a lot longer in visiting the museum and going through all of the things there are to see. So one might want to take a break, but it's also a sort of welcome and hospitable attitude for visitors. The designer of the cafe was not us. We, Selldorf Architects, did the sort of basic organization of the space. But Brian O'Sullivan, a designer from London, is actually has completed the design. And I purposefully didn't show you a picture with furniture because just wait for it. On the other hand, we're also very proud of having been able to collaborate with Sam Anderson on the conservation space. The Frick never had a decent conservation space before. It was always on the third floor in a corner without any exhaust or anything. So when they were using solvents, they had to open the windows, which in January isn't so nice. And a wonderful grant was available from the Fairchild Foundation to give the Frick the opportunity to have a conservation studio where not only drawings and paintings or frames, really probably not so many paintings, but many of the pieces of furniture and decorative elements of the house are being cared for. And here, one more picture. Now you can go up the stair to the second floor, and it's really a marvel to be able to walk up this grand staircase. And there you find the upstairs room, the walnut room that used to be a conference space, and this is actually where Henry Clay Frick's bedroom was. It's a marvelous room, and it's wonderful to see all these paintings in them. Beautifully lit. Most of the paintings are lit by picture lights, but all of the chandeliers have been restored. Again, air and electricity is all done. I think it's worthwhile mentioning this room here, which is the Boucher room. That was one of the acquisitions that Henry Clay Frick made to serve as the boudoir of his wife Adelaide. And it was always on the second floor in the southwest corner of the mansion. And when the house was turned into a museum, it was removed from the second floor and refitted on the ground floor. This was, of course, a wonderful opportunity to set it back and bring it back to the place where it had been at one time. And it was really something to see how craftsmen went to work to reinstall the wood floors, to refit the wood paneling, to reset the panel paintings, and make this room into something that it hadn't been since 1935. Here, a floor plan that shows you what the auditorium looks like in plan. If you aren't experiencing that right now. It was a room that lent itself to be in this particular corner of the building, and I told you why. Because this very part here is where 3 stories had already been excavated. So it was relatively easy to create a little bit more space for an auditorium for 220 seats. We were able to create this kind of ante-room before here. It has much less ceiling height. Nevertheless, I think it's a very nice and welcoming room. And again, a Murano glass light installation reminds us of the round lecture hall that we transposed, so to speak. I love this room. I've already said that a couple of times. I'm not going to say it many more times. But here's just a sketch. It was an idea. We knew what we wanted it to be in plan, a semi-round theater, practically semi-round. And so this kind of oval shape offered itself, I would say. That was the concept sketch, and then it developed into proper drawings and a lot of thinking about what would it look like, how would we make it comfortable. From the get-go, I imagined that we would have these kind of fauteuils where you can comfortably sit, hear somebody yammer on about the architecture, or listen to music. And that was not insignificant. We did a lot of studies with our team to understand how sound would reverberate here. And listening to music in this room is something that really brought tears to my eyes. It was extremely interesting to see how this room developed from being just a big hole in the ground to the tiers being built one by one, and then a kind of net of structural support for the walls. And I always imagined that you wanted to be in a room where it would feel very peaceful and very quiet. I would think of a sort of overcast sky that is at once completely uniform, but maybe gives you a little opening here or there. And so it was a very, very much a collaborative effort to get the color just right. Was it gradating from the bottom to the top? You see that there's lights on either all around the perimeter. It worked out. And that sinuous curve is an interesting thing because it really is like a drawing, but it is also entirely functional because 2 different spaces come together. That space that is the stage where there's all kinds of equipment hidden up there, but having the 2 things hand in hand, having something that's entirely functional, visible, together with a kind of gesture of enclosure was something that really mattered to us. And there you have it. Thank you. Lisa Green, my partner in the office, just said, "What about thanking people in the office?" I don't have to thank anybody because I did everything myself. That is a gross omission. I talked about the city that it takes to do, it's a village in the office. Lisa Green is one of the partners. Oliver Link was instrumental as a leader and partner in the office, together with Sarah Lopergolo, who used to work at Selldorf, but a whole team of others, Paul Granger, Pinar, Michael Rosen, so many people. And thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everybody at Selldorf, but everybody else.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. And it's been really wonderful and interesting, and now I understand even better what some of the motivations behind the things are that we are now dealing with. And as we were coming here, we opened a door, it was a little heavy, and she looked at me in an accusing way, and I said, don't look at me with an accusing look. You made it. But we are really living now with the building, and it's also a wonderful experience, really, to take it to that next level. All I want to say is the book is forthcoming, where you can read a lot more about the project, and otherwise we're going to continue the series after the summer, and then I hope we will welcome my predecessor actually back, and Ian Wardropper will be speaking also about. The book is, hold on, horse, and the book is called A Design for Continuity and Change, the Frick Collection. There you have it. And it's going to be published, I can even tell you that, by Paul Holberton Publishing. It's coming out this summer. So thank you very much for coming, and please come visit again.